Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we've got a really exciting video for you guys. We've been doing a lot of experimentation on the side and playing around with some of our keyboards to see how we can lube our switches without having to desolder them off of our keyboard. And this could be really useful for someone who bought a pre-built, pre-soldered keyboard and they don't necessarily have the desoldering tools and the soldering tools to take them off and put them back together. So in this video, we're going to cover two different methods and the before and after sound tests of how to lube your keyboard switches without desoldering. Let's jump into the video. Okay, so why even lube your switches in the first place? We have some sound tests of before and after lubing your switches, and it makes a significant difference in a lot of different areas. One, you're gonna get some better sound. Depending on the lube type, you're gonna get some different varieties of sounds and different varieties of improvements. Some lubes, you're just improving the feel and the smoothness and the quickness of the switch overall. Other lubes, you're going to improve like sort of making it buttery and more thocky and bassier sounding. It just depends on what you're going for and what your preferences are. So sound is one. Two is feel. You're gonna have smoother switches and less scratchiness. For example, with Cherry MX Reds, you feel some of that friction when you're pressing on it initially. If you lube them, it will improve that scratchiness a ton. Third, smoother typing of course. And then there's some other ones like reducing the tactile bump of your tactile switches. If you're into that, that's very much preference. For example, on my T1s, they were too tactile for me, so I lubed them, including the legs, to reduce their tactility, and now they're a little bit better for me, although their bump is still like giant mountain kind of bump. And last is less rattle for your switches and less ping sound from your springs. So when you're typing, you're hearing that echoey ping sound. That's from the spring, and lubing those springs could really help reduce those sounds. So I'm gonna say one thing first is a disclaimer. If you don't have a method to desolder, then go ahead and try some of these methods. But in the end, I really don't recommend that you do something like this if you do have like a hot swap board or if you have the tools to desolder your switches. In that case, the better option would be to take apart your switches and brush lube them the normal way. Now, let's jump into the first method that we tried, and this one is spray lubing. It's real fast, but it's dirty. Whew. So for this board, I decided to spray lube the Womier K66. It has Gateron red switches, and to do this, you first need to take your keyboard apart. That means taking off the keycaps. That means taking apart the PCB from the board if it's tray mounted. If it has other mounting styles, take apart that PCB from the top plate or the case, and then you can work with it at that point. You're gonna need some of these supplies. So the PCB is the first one with the switches soldered onto it. The second one is that we use a Super Lube aerosol spray, and this is Super Lube 31110. I'll link it down below to the exact product that we used. And you're gonna need your switches to be cross-shaped stem switches and not box switches. If they're box switches, then you're not going to be able to get that spray inside the switch, and box switches have a self-cleaning mechanism anyway, so your lube's not going to be in there very long. So cross-shaped stem switches, which is what you see between Cherry and Gateron and all those. And then you're going to need a mask, gloves, preferably disposable gloves, a straw or a tube to contain the spray from the aerosol, paper towels, and of course alcohol wipes to clean up your PCB after you spray lube them. And be outdoors. Don't do this indoors. It's not good for you indoors. This is why we wear a mask. If you want to be extra careful, then wear some eye protection. And then another disclaimer, of course, doing this can ruin your switches and your PCB, so do it at your own risk. It worked for us. It worked for a lot of other people. It is risky though, so keep that in mind. Okay, so first you're gonna go outside, take your spray lube bottle, shake it a lot of shaking for this one. You really need to mix up the components very well. And then you want to have your little straw and then your outside protecting straw attached to your super lube bottle. And for this keyboard, I decided to do one spray per switch on the corner of the non-LED side. You can use two. I've seen people do two sprays. I felt like one spray was enough though. It looked like there was plenty of lube coming into that switch when I did it. Just a very quick spray. No need to hold down on that trigger. And then afterwards, I just cleaned it with alcohol wipes. Honestly, the whole process took like 5 minutes going outdoors, spraying each switch and then bringing it back inside for cleaning. And then of course you let it dry for about 2 to 3 days if you want it to 100% be dry before you actually plug it in. So when I first plugged it in, there were a few letters that weren't functioning as properly as they should have, and the spacebar was a little slow to respond to. So I let that dry a little bit more and then came back, and now it's functioning just fine. We do have some sound tests that we like to show you, and that's gonna come up right now. It's gonna be a before and after. Have fun with that. All right, so that was a sound test. As you can hear, there is some improvement in the sound. I also made modifications to the stabilizers, including tightening them up around their little space on the plate and lubing them with dielectric grease as well. So that made the modifier buttons and the spacebar sound a lot better than they did when stock. My conclusion on this spray lubing method is that I think it works. It's worth it if you're willing to take the risk and you're not willing to desolder your switches. If it's a budget pre-built keyboard, yeah, go for it. And then I would also only recommend this on linear switches, not necessarily tactile. Since if it's a tactile switch, you can't really control if the lube's going to get on the places where you might not want them to get, and that might reduce the tactility of your switches, causing inconsistencies among all the switches of your keyboard. So just linear switch for this method, and then it's really fast, but it's really messy too. I honestly felt a little gross touching my keyboard afterward until I was sure that it was cleaner and safe to touch. Another thing is that the stem, the lube around that cross-shaped stem is really hard to clean off. Even with all the alcohol wipes, it still gets stuck in the little corners. So when you put your keycaps back on, it's going to be a little bit dirty and crusty. So make sure you press down all the way, and you're gonna hear a little bit of a crunch. I know, sort of gross. So that's my conclusion for this one. Let's go on to method number 2, which you might have seen already from some other people on YouTube, and that is the, I don't know what to call it. I guess we'll call it the push stem lubing method. If anybody can find a name for this method, comment that down below, but if not, we're going to move forward and call this the push stem lubing method. And the name is exactly what it implies. You're going to literally push lube into the switch by pushing down the stem. So here's what you need. You're going to need small plastic pieces that can fit into the switches around in the space between the housing and the stem. Very small, narrow cracks around there. You're going to need either the Super Lube 51010 precision pen with the Super Lube oil, or you can use what we use, and that was the Super Lube 51004, which is a little bit thicker than the oil, I believe. The pen already comes with a pretty fine precision tip, so you might not need that plastic to insert it, but I recommend that anyway since it's going to be more control over what you're doing. So we had Super Lube 51004. I put it into a small container and had my plastic pieces ready and tweezers, because if you're going to handle lube, either wear gloves or don't touch them. And if you do, wash your hands afterwards right away. Don't get it on your skin, and definitely don't get it on your eyes, nose, mouth, any of those things. Another disclaimer, this could ruin your switches and your PCB as well, so do it at your own risk. And this one was more time consuming. It took a lot more effort to get lube on the little plastic piece and then dig in to the area between the housing and the stem until I felt like there was enough lube in it. And I felt like this method didn't really do well to reduce the spring ping. Maybe I didn't use enough lube, but I mean, when people say lube your switches, they usually say less is more, but in this case, maybe I used too little, because the sound test from before and after didn't really seem that much different to me. But I'll let you judge for yourself. Here it is right now. All right, so if you heard any differences, comment down below and tell me what you think. I felt like there was a very minimal difference. This method was a lot more clean, but I don't know if the results are worth it. I did lube the stabilizers. I did try and tighten them, but during the process, I did end up losing the stabilizers of the backspace. I tried fixing it and it did not pop back in. So that is unfortunate. Fortunately for me, the switch actually sounds pretty good without the stabilizers. So maybe that was lucky after all. So that's pretty good. Yeah, so those were the two methods that we used and found to be from minimally effective to slightly more effective to lubing your switches that are in a pre-built, pre-soldered keyboard and you don't really have the opportunity or the resources to desolder them and then solder them back. These might be effective methods and could improve the sound and feel of your switches. I do recommend you only use these for linear switches and then do so at your own risk because it could ruin your switches or your PCB. If you're doing it and you don't like it, don't blame me. Remember, always test it out on one switch before doing it to your entire keyboard, like we always say. Anyways, those were the two methods that we used. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful to you. I'm going to link you to some other mods that you can do to your mechanical keyboard here, and then to our mechanical keyboard ASMR playlist here, and subscribe here if you want to. If not, that's cool, and I'll see you in the next one.